So the question is how to practice as a layperson, or rather how to make progress as a householder. So in your household life, how to develop your Dhamma practice further. The first point would be to recognize that, well, we said that before, that you are responsible for your environment. So if you're a householder, you have to take responsibility for choosing to remain so. And same, like if you choose to stop being a householder and go forth, become a monk or a nun, again, you will be responsible for your actions and consequences that would come out of it. The reason why people would try and avoid responsibility for that, for wherever they are, for things they chose to do, and now they have to live with the results of those things, is because it would make you feel guilty, so to speak. So if you, for example, you value practice of the Dhamma, you want to progress in the Dhamma, but you have to look after your family now. That family hasn't been sort of thrown upon you. It's a result of your actions, of your choices before, maybe before you came across the Dhamma, but nevertheless, you are responsible for it. So even if now you would like to not have to look after other people, because you want to dedicate your life to practicing the Dhamma, you can't, because you've made such actions, you've done such actions and choices that have resulted in other people being dependent upon you. So you have to recognize that you are responsible for the environment, and that means that you cannot use environment as an excuse. So there is a difference there. There's a difference between you accepting responsibility and not excusing yourself for not practicing further because of the environment. But more often than not, what people do is they don't accept the responsibility, in a sense of they might accept the responsibility on the surface, but underneath they still regard and have pretty much a view that the environment excuses you from not practicing further. But that's not the case. So you choose then environment to become a reason, a justification for your lack of further practice. So even as a householder, it doesn't matter. So the point is to accept that responsibility, and that means not to use your environment as an excuse for your lack of development, for still being a Putujana, for example, or not being free from suffering. So you want to kind of remove that attitude, because it just removes any basis for correct practice, for as long as you're covering it up. So you factually recognize that other people's lives might be compromised if you stop looking after them, be it your children, your spouses, your parents. But at the same time, you factually do not use that as an excuse for not practicing. So that will kind of force you force you into a maximum effort within that compromised environment. And this ties in with my next point, which is sense restraint, precepts, and even celibacy. Often people would argue that they cannot become a monk or a nun because they have to look after the family, which is factually correct. But then that fact would somehow jump into a justification that because of that, they don't also need to be sense restrained. And those are two completely separate things. So yes, you don't have to ordain and become a monk, but that is not to say that you can also not practice sense restraint and develop in Dhamma. So in simple terms, people find a certain factual basis of needing to stay a layman or a laywoman, but then that factual basis, because it's not taken responsibly in the sense we just described, that factual basis then becomes an excuse, and as such it becomes a blanket excuse for not accepting. Blanket excuse for not going forth, but then also blanket excuse for now, because I'm not going forth, I don't need to practice sense restraint here either. And as I said, those are two separate things. You can stay a layman for the rest of your life, and that's one thing. But if you choose that being a layman means I don't have to be sense restrained and practice the Dhamma, that's just a contradiction in terms on all sorts of levels. And by the way, this applies to those who are interested in actually practicing the Dhamma. Not like practicing the Dhamma because it makes me feel good or helps me with things, but practicing the Dhamma in the form of in the way that the Buddha was teaching the suttas, which is basically undoing your being, undoing the bhava, undoing your sense of self. So it's not something you can do on the weekends only or on a 10-day retreat. So your whole life needs to start revolving around it. Doesn't matter if that life is in a household setting or not. So you have to recognize that there is a certain kind of kind of natural tendency of an ignorant mind to lean towards finding that excuse that will remove that sense of guilt or pressure that you might feel upon you when you recognize that certain values, certain things that you value yourself are being contradicted by your very lifestyle and your very actions. So it seems to be an automatic thing whereby people would think that if I'm not a monk, I don't need to be sense restrained, and that's just silly. Because the only time that would be accurate thing to say, oh, I'm not a monk, I don't need to be sense restrained, is if you don't want to practice Dhamma. Then yeah, you don't need to be sense restrained. You don't need to do anything. But the slightest familiarity with the suttas will just show what a silly view this is. Because if you want to practice the Dhamma, there is no Dhamma without a basis of sila and sense restraint. How good, how well established that basis is, that's how well the Dhamma will grow or not. And even and that's the case, by the way, for the monks and lay people. There's no difference there in that sense. And even those the arahants after the Buddha's passing away, when they met in the first council, when they were deciding what should they recite first, the suttas, Dhamma suttas or Vinaya suttas, the origin stories of the rules and precepts, they have unanimously decided to recite the rules first, the origin story of how every rule came to be, and everything, because they said there is no Dhamma without sila. So yes, sila is not the Dhamma, but there is no Dhamma without the sila. So if you think you can practice the Dhamma without a sense restraint, literally you're saying, you found a way to practice the Dhamma without sila. And that's something that even Buddha himself could not have found, because there isn't one. So then how much you will progress in your lay setting will depend how well you're sense restrained. So you can have duties and responsibilities and work, and all of that will be putting stress on you and everything else, but none of that can be a reason for being unrestrained. So how well you develop that restraint in that adverse environment of constant distraction, pressure, demands of others, from others and so on, that's how well you will progress. So that's why people would go forth and change the environment, not because somehow magically by putting on robes, sense restraint, you just becomes easy and you're just flying effortlessly. No, it's just simply because the environment is more suitable for sense restraint, because you wouldn't have to deal with so many things distracting you all the time. So I'm saying, if there is a reason that you cannot do that, that's still the principle of the practice does not change. It doesn't care for your reasons, basically. So if you have a reason that prevents you from going forth and ordaining, that's fine, but that reason cannot become your justification now for lack of sense restraint, for lack of celibacy, and so on. So how far you want to progress in practice is how far you want to be restrained. I think Ajahn Chah said something like, if you give up little, you will find little peace. If you give up more, you find more peace. If you give everything up, you'll find the ultimate peace. So nobody is excused from that principle. If you want to, have a mediocre progress in Dhamma, so to speak, have some sense of a greater spiritual purpose, they will not require you to give things up significantly, and it will not require you to experience the pain of sense restraint, sometimes for days in that lay setting. then I guess 5 precepts would be enough. And but you can't really regard it as a significant progress in the Dhamma. I mean, back in the day, when the Buddha, like, first of all, they haven't really, for most of their life, they haven't even taught the Dhamma to lay people, because he will make them give up the lay life. And it was only when Anathapindika on his deathbed heard Sariputta giving the teaching that made him Sotapanna, he said, "Oh, why didn't you teach this to lay people before?" And then begged him to do so, because there are those people who will be able to understand. Yeah, so vast majority won't, because vast majority will find it too unpleasant to withdraw themselves from sensuality while they live in the sensual world. But there are those who can do it. And so then even those people who understood the Dhamma and practiced, they done so because their lifestyle was already being aligned with it, and they were making effort. People have not magically become anagamis in the suttas as householders and then started practicing sense restraint, which seems to be what people expect nowadays. No, they've been sense restrained, they've been virtuous, they've been generous, they've been obviously contemplating Dhamma rightly. As a result of it, they have become free from sensuality completely, developed jhanas completely, and so on. So it's important to accept that responsibility. They will prevent you from using your situation as an excuse, and that will basically outline exactly how much you can progress, because you will know how much you can be sense restrained, and to that extent you will create a basis for the Dhamma to apply to. Like, you can know all the suttas and everything, but if there is no basis of virtue, as those arahants said, none of that will have any fertile ground to grow from. So consequently, if you have a thoroughly high quality established virtue and very little knowledge of the Dhamma, it will still grow, because the fertile ground is there, and it's very potent, so to speak. So it comes down to that, to how willing you are to take the pains of sense restraint. And if you want to make a significant strides towards freedom from suffering, yeah, you have to aim even for celibacy, even as a household, like the ones in the suttas. If back then sense restraint was necessary, you can only imagine how much more so it is today. It's simply not optional. And the aim should be also for that sense restraint as like a lifetime goal, not something I'll do over the weekend and hopefully I'll understand the Dhamma over the weekend and then I can go back to my lay unrestrained ways. It needs to be taken on as a value, and then even if you sometimes might slip back, break the precepts or lose sense restraint, the value remains there as something that will pull you back towards the right direction. But if you don't value it in that ultimate sense as something to be ultimately developed and maintained, then you will not be restrained even when you are, so to speak. It's like, for example, when people try to give up an addiction, say smoking. It's much harder to give it up if your decision to give up pertains for the rest of your life. So if you say, I will never smoke again for the rest of my life, you will feel the weight of that much more than if you just try and give up smoking and let me see how I feel, I won't smoke for a while. Then sometimes people can go for months without cigarettes, but they never really stop smoking, and they will always have to go back to it, always. The only way to not go back to it is to have aimed at that ultimate value that you will never smoke again. Then even if you fail and go back to it, that ultimate value will keep you in the right direction. And in that sense, that guilt that I was talking about in the beginning of this video is useful. It will realign you with that which you value, which is why you feel guilty. So the worst thing is to try and justify it and cover it up and psychologize your way out of it so you don't feel discomfort. There is a good type of discomfort. Like guilt on account of losing the virtue, losing the sense restraint is a good guilt. It's what the Buddha said, that's what protects the world from doing immoral acts. You will feel unpleasant, you will feel ashamed, and you will have a sense of like fear because what you value, you went against it. And not just that, if you practice like that, you will also be able to see these things, unwholesome things, even before you commit to them, before you act out of them. The choice of either choosing wholesome or unwholesome would be much more clearly outlined for you. So how to progress as a layperson in the Dhamma is really comes down to deciding how far you want to progress in that practice. If you're clear how far you want to go, then it will be clear to you how far you should be restrained and how far you need to make that effort of enduring the discomfort of a household environment. And it will also then make your efforts towards Dhamma contemplation and study much more efficient. Like, for example, the example I gave, people naturally think that avoiding and overcoming sense of guilt is good. But as you see yourself just now, it's not always the case, because sometimes you might be rightfully so feeling guilty on account of something you've done. And you should not cover that up. Endure that pain, that remorse, because it is reshaping the value then in regard to thing you've done. So next time you won't make the same mistake. So you force yourself to learn from it. And that's really the unpleasant thing. People think you can learn the Dhamma and practice Dhamma on your own terms, but you can't. The only way to do it rightly is to set yourself up for being towards that practice. In other words, set yourself up to prevent yourself from choosing the non-practice. Let's put it like that. So, through practicing sense restraint, to acknowledging the guilt of wrongdoing, of losing that sense restraint, to not using environment as an excuse, you set yourself up towards facing basically that which needs to be dealt with, which is avoiding the pain, avoiding the suffering, avoiding the discomfort. And that's always the root of the entire sensual world. The only reason people go back to sense desires or pursue the sense desires is because it's too unpleasant to not do so. And that's where people would then develop the view and try to justify that, no, you don't need to be sense restrained and you can practice Dhamma. It's all of that. Even if that were theoretically true, it's not true individually, because individually it's always rooted in trying to avoid pain. So what you're saying is, yes, you can free yourself from pain by trying to avoid pain. By pursuing distraction from pain, you will find a way out of pain. And that's a complete contradiction in terms. If you're willing, so if, as I said, if you sort of block all these escape routes that the ignorant mind has of ignoring, psychologizing, avoiding, justifying, then you will start to face that which pain really is. And you don't need to wait for misfortunes to happen to you or all sorts of types of suffering, things that are not in control. They will eventually. You just need to start practicing sense restraint, and you're going to have a pure, undulated pain of your resistance. And that's what practice is. Finding the way out of it without resorting to any external means. So if something gets too much, well, that's why you start gradually, 5 precepts, 8 precepts occasionally, but again, not I'll do this for a week and then whatever, hopefully I'll be coming out and then I won't have to make the effort ever again. No, it needs to be the value for the rest of your life. So even if you can only do it for a week, you still value it as something to be done again and again and again. And that is a lifetime of work and more than enough basis for sufficient practice. And yes, you could then expect results such as overcoming sensuality, being almost completely free from suffering, as much as an anagami would be. And that is possible in a household life, but that is not possible without a sense restraint in a household life.